Yohei pointed me to an article from yesterday that says Facebook open to currency pegged stablecoins for Libra project. So Libra is the new cryptocurrency announced by Facebook as of, I don't know, a few months ago. And it's an entirely new cryptocurrency and or blockchain, depending on how you define these things. And they have a new programming language, like a new script language inside of it. And it's an entirely custom design, at least according to the white papers. It was also going to be a new coin. But according to this article, they are now publicly let's say, interested in the idea of using an existing currency such as the US dollar or the EUR, euro, or all of the above, and allowing people to use fiat currencies as sort of backed tokens on the cryptocurrency. So what I want to pitch is actually that it would be better if Facebook actually adopted Bitcoin SV instead of doing their own. And there's a very simple sort of fundamental explanation, but I want to give a bit of background for people who haven't already, who don't know me and don't know what I'm going to say. So the original idea for Bitcoin is very different than what the current Bitcoin core community is following. So what everyone refers to as Bitcoin or BTC is actually basically a completely different project now that's not pursuing anything like the original idea. The primary difference is that they think it's a good idea to strictly limit the maximum block size to help keep Bitcoin decentralized. That was never the original idea. Bitcoin is not supposed to be something where everyone runs a node. Bitcoin is an economic system, and miners are businesses. The people that should mine Bitcoin are the people that can do so efficiently and profit from doing so. It's something that, just like you have internet companies where people that create infrastructure like Facebook or Google or Cisco or any of these types of companies, the people that create infrastructure are the ones that are actually so good at it that they can actually have a profitable business, or at least a sustainable growing business, by creating this infrastructure. It's exactly the same thing with Bitcoin. This is not supposed to be something where everyone runs a node. For people that aren't already familiar with this, I encourage you to simply read the original writings of Satoshi Nakamoto. You can see what the original idea was and how Bitcoin Core no longer aligns with that idea. What we're doing in the Bitcoin SV world is actually exactly that original idea. We are pursuing the original vision from Satoshi Nakamoto, and the idea basically is very simple. We don't have a maximum block size. And other than that, it's just the original Bitcoin protocol. In fact, the original Bitcoin protocol did not have a maximum block size. That was something that was added in. This matters a lot because this is how you scale the system. When blocks get very, very big, a lot of people will not be able to afford to run a full node. But those are the people that clearly don't have a profitable or sustainable business. By doing so, why should they run a node? They should do something that they actually can afford to do and something that they are good at and that they can profit from. You don't actually have to run a node to do most things. You can receive payments in a nearly completely trustless manner and in a way that is incredibly secure by simply checking whether your transaction was confirmed in a block without actually validating everyone else's transactions. So SPV was described in the original white paper. End users can do SPV, and so can businesses. So you simply don't need to actually run a node for almost any use case. So once we have this idea in mind that what we're going to do is basically allow a market to determine these parameters. The market determines the size of blocks. The market determines the rate of transaction volume. And businesses are the ones that actually create all the infrastructure and manage all this stuff. When you have this idea in mind, you realize that Bitcoin was actually very well designed originally. That it's actually designed to scale. And the idea coming out of the Bitcoin core people that Bitcoin doesn't scale, well, their version of Bitcoin doesn't scale. That's because their idea is not a scalable idea, the idea that everyone's going to run a node. When you recognize that Bitcoin operates the same way as anything else, like the internet, where its businesses create infrastructure, what matters more is basically things like the UTXO model, whereby you can validate a transaction like in parallel with other transactions, because all you need to know is whether the UTXO was spent or not. So because there's no state that you have to worry about, you can actually validate every transaction in parallel. So there's actually no limit to the number of transactions that a miner can validate in a second, because just do it in parallel. Not to say that it's necessarily like easy. I mean, like, when we're talking very, very vast scale, it will be very difficult, and there are challenges that have to be overcome. But these are straightforward engineering challenges, not theoretical ones. The simple answer is just validate them in parallel, and you can go up to arbitrarily. I mean, the only limits here are basically physical limits. I mean, there's no limit to the size that blocks can be. You also don't, strictly speaking, have to store the entire blockchain either. So the miners can prune data if they want to. The only thing they must keep is the UTXO set, so that when a new transaction comes in, they can validate it. But they don't actually have to keep the entire blockchain. They might, I'm not sure. The point is that it's actually determined by a market, that this isn't something that's built into the design of it. Similar to TCP/IP, the idea behind Bitcoin is a protocol that just is fixed. And you can solve all these problems without changing the core protocol. So this is what we're doing in the Bitcoin SV world. Now, what I think Facebook should do is, if you think and understand what I'm saying, Libra says they have a theoretical transaction limit of about 1,000 transactions per second. That's a lot less than what we're going to be able to do with Bitcoin SV, because there is no limit. We can validate things in parallel. This is not a system where everything was designed in from the start. A framework was designed, and then remaining problems can be solved by creating businesses. People can create infrastructure businesses, you can create software businesses, hardware businesses, and so on, and solve these bits and pieces by providing services for other businesses. So the expression that captures this idea is every problem with Bitcoin can be solved with Bitcoin. We don't need to change the protocol to do all these things. We can use the original protocol, and it's actually better to do it this way, because when you realize there wasn't actually a problem, it's actually better to just leave it alone so that we have a stable protocol that we can actually create solutions on. If you go around changing the protocol, it is unlikely that you're actually going to end up with something that is deeply, fundamentally better. If you do, that's wonderful, but you probably won't, and I don't think that Libra falls into that category. I think it's actually probably worse, just given by the number, your own limitation on the transaction volume is less than the theoretical limit on Bitcoin SV. So, if you can't do better, it makes more sense to use the original protocol. That way we can keep building on it and keep using it. So I think it's unlikely that Libra will end up becoming better than this one. So what I suggest to Facebook is actually either create a US dollar or EUR token on Bitcoin SV, or help migrate one of the other ones like the Coinbase token. So the Coinbase and Circle, I think, have one called, I think it's called a USDC. So there's both the technical side, and then there's like the sort of banking side of doing a stable coin. The banking side has actually been solved by Coinbase and Circle right now, because they have a legal and compliant stablecoin on Ethereum. But Ethereum isn't going to scale for the reasons I was saying earlier, because Ethereum didn't do this UTXO model. Ethereum has a state model. Effectively, what happens is every miner has to validate the transactions in the same order as everybody else, because it's very difficult to know if there is another order in which you can run them, which means you basically can't do anything in parallel, which means that Ethereum is like putting a world computer on a single core instead of multi-core. Bitcoin allows you to put the world computer on as many cores as necessary. So because Ethereum isn't going to scale, they're not going to be able to go much bigger than what they currently are. And their ideas for scaling don't involve scaling the blockchain. It involves inventing completely different technologies that will impact user experience. So I'm not optimistic about scaling Ethereum. The way we're going to scale Bitcoin SV, is by having bigger and bigger blocks with no upper bound whatsoever, and people are going to create infrastructure businesses that solve the little problems that occur along the way. So the point is that you can put something like USDC on BSV, and it will actually scale. You'll actually be able to reach the 2 billion or so users on Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and all these things, because it scales in a very straightforward manner. So there is work that has to be done. That not all of this parallelization software has actually been written, but it's a software engineering problem, not a theoretical problem. There is no unsolved theoretical challenge between us and scaling. It's a matter of doing it. It's a matter of building the application, solving problems for real businesses, and just solving these technical challenges. One tiny iterative step at a time to get all the way to 1 million transactions per second or more. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope that people at Facebook recognize that Bitcoin is an economic system first, not a computer science solution. The difference is basically the whole idea of the architecture of Bitcoin is to empower people to create businesses in and around this thing. It's not about designing everything in from the start and just hoping that it's perfect, or else everything explodes in a disaster like Ethereum, basically. And I don't mean to offend them, but the reality is, because it doesn't scale, they have like a fundamental challenge. There is no such fundamental challenge with Bitcoin. Now, it remains to be seen what will happen with Libra, and I've read the white papers and haven't studied it in detail, but I think that the fact that you recognize your own scaling limit with 1,000 transactions per second, that's not enough. We need to do more than 1,000 transactions per second. And so how do you do that? Well, you can do that with Bitcoin. There is no theoretical limit to the upper transaction volume on Bitcoin. If anybody has any particular questions, certainly anybody from Facebook and anybody else, about how to do this exactly, I'm happy to give more information and detail about this. But anyway, so I hope Facebook is listening, and I hope that you guys take this idea seriously, that it's very straightforward to put a token on BSV. It will scale much better, and you're going to have none of these problems that you have with regulators, whereby you're threatening them with a new currency or something like this. Nor will you have any of these peculiar technical challenges, because you haven't quite nailed the protocol the way that the original Bitcoin did. All right, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening, and please get in touch with me if you have any questions. All right, thank you.